Last year, Adobe excitedly announced their plans to acquire Figma for a massive $20 billion. Believe it or not, Figma isn't a Ligma joke, as poor Green Dev here seemed to think. Figma is a much more important tool that a lot of developers, product designers, and companies as a whole rely on heavily for building their applications for users. I don't think back fondly on the days where I would use tools like Photoshop or Dreamweaver to try and design what a UI would look like before the real code was written. Those times were rough. They were bad. Figma and Sketch were the early options for product mocking tools, where you would actually design your product in software. It didn't work. It wasn't code, unlike Dreamweaver, which kind of was code but was bad. The goal of these tools was to let designers go crazy and make awesome looking things that product teams could then adopt and build on top of with the actual engineers. It did not take long after this market was established for a clear winner to emerge. It was Figma, by a lot. Thank you, Gurgly, for this very, very useful tweet, because most designers preferred Figma. The most important thing in this chart isn't actually just the amount of people who picked Figma over others. It's the ratio of primary to secondary, where it's basically the only thing other than whatever Lunacy is, where the majority use it as their primary tool, not as their secondary tool. That's huge. So even people who do use Adobe XD and Sketch are still more likely to use something else as their primary tool. And I promise you, all the Adobe XD customers were very clear with Figma that was the case. And that's why this happened, because Figma found this market, cornered this market, and won this market with the best tool for designing your apps. So why are we talking about this again? Because this already happened, right? Like, why do we care? So important news came out today, but it will only make sense if we go back in time a little first, to when the initial plans to acquire Figma started. Back in June of last year, news stories started to come out about how Adobe was putting XD on life support, where it was being hidden from a bunch of the UI. You couldn't find it in Creative Cloud Launcher, and you couldn't purchase it as a standalone app anymore. It was clear Adobe had planned to shutter XD in favor of Figma pretty early, but this was when Figma was going to become one of the tools in Adobe's suite. Since that isn't happening, they're just going to bring XD back now, right? Of course not. First and foremost, during the acquisition, some interesting news came out. Adobe is focused on AI rather than Figma, with acquisition in limbo. So when it was still unsure if the acquisition would happen, Adobe was pitching to their investors that AI was the thing they'd be focused on. And they even surveyed their investors, where more of them were interested in the AI Photoshop features than in the Figma deal, by quite a bit. Adobe's focus at its annual conference in LA was on new generative AI features in signature products like Photoshop. There were no mentions of Figma during keynote speeches, and only one reference during an hours-long investor briefing. The design startup had no presence on the exhibition floor. It seemed like they were already ready to leave this product design world and go in on AI. I don't know if y'all know this, AI is still pretty bad at generating product mocks. Like V0's cool by Vercel, but we're still very early in those tools. Whereas generation for images, for like photos of people and stuff, that's an insane place. I'm still regularly just mind broken by the incredible stuff you can do with things like Midjourney, to the point where I've actually started using it for some of my content, which I never thought I would do. But that part makes sense. And this is why today's news goes from crazy to actually kind of making sense, because Adobe has just announced that they're effectively throwing Adobe XD overboard now that the Figma deal has failed. I love this subtitle. It's not a temper tantrum, it's a business strategy. It's all over for Adobe XD. After losing out on its $20 billion bid for Figma, the firm is conceding defeat in the UI design area, for now at least, in the fallout of a deal that saw companies placed under the microscope of competition authorities in Europe and the US. Bloomberg is now reporting that Adobe's confirmed it has no plans to further invest in its own UI UX web design software. This might look like Adobe's taking back their ball because it doesn't want to play anymore, but it feels more like the inevitable conclusion for an app that was placed into maintenance mode once the company announced its surprise acquisition attempt. However, support will continue for existing users, with Adobe remaining open to new product design partners. So there's hope yet for XD fans. Yeah, we shall see. Game over, man. When Adobe first revealed plans to buy Figma, some of Adobe XD users remained quietly hopeful the team up would lead to a blend of the best from both prototyping platforms. Presumably, the board had the same idea, strengthening an app that had been increasingly losing market share to the more accessible Figma for a while. Outside the community, Adobe's deal was eyed with heavy skepticism. Figma users feared a gutting of their favorite graphics design software. The markets weren't enamored, the authorities even less so, with the regulatory watchdogs in the EU, UK, and US all examining the fine print for evidence the merger would create a monopoly. And users of Adobe XD were dismayed to find their tool effectively shuttered, receiving only bug and security updates. This is an important bit. People were starting to speculate XD would come back because it does have a handful of really strong fanboys. They're just not quite strong enough to save the product or justify its existence even. And as such, the company is now much more focused on Photoshop and Premiere Pro. God, please fix Premiere Pro. Premiere is an absolute shit show and it needs to burn. Hopefully they'll do something to it, but the wrong product got shuttered. Anyways, Adobe's official statement was, we're focused on the opportunity we have across imaging, photography, design, web, animation, and 3D, as well as Express and Firefly. Good old Photoshop and Creative Cloud Express. Ugh, what a shit show. I don't want to end on the bad news, so I'm going to sneak in a little piece of good news, which is that Figma is actually boosting the employee equity packages after the Adobe deal collapsed. There's a lot of reasons why this would happen. Probably that nice multi-billion-dollar payout that went to Figma as part of the split, but it is honestly nice to see Figma recognizing the inherent stress of being an employee at a company during a time like that. So yeah, really cool to see a lot of people getting more stock, especially since they just lost what they were expecting to be a $20 billion payout. An important call out here is that Figma is still a startup. And while we realize this may not be what some on our team expected or signed up for, we're fired up for the next chapter and hope Figmates choose to stay and be part of it. I will say, of all the company self-terms, Figmates might actually be the worst. I hate that. I would never be able to work at Figma. Not even just the Ligma jokes. So Adobe XD is dead, Sketch isn't going anywhere, and it seems like Figma won. How do we feel about that, though? Do we think the product design market needs more innovation, or are we just going to be happy with Figma going forward? I'm actually curious what y'all have to say because I don't use these tools enough to have as strong of an opinion. I used to be real deep in Figma when I was at Twitch, but honestly, fast enough at writing web code now, we tend to just mock things out in Tailwind. We had a designer that might be different. I'm curious what your experience has been. Let me know in the comments. Till next time, see you guys later. Peace, nerds.